Today we'll be taking a look at Skyrim Special Edition on the PS4 and the Potato Masher. If you don't know, the Potato Masher is a $375 PC custom built in 2014 and designed to compete with the PS4 for the rest of its lifecycle. The goal is not to pick on consoles, but to show that PC gaming can be just as good or better for the same money. By the time you watch this, I should have received my PS4 Pro and I'm starting to test a few games. I've saved Titanfall 2 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare for after the Pro's launch, and I'm looking forward to testing them in a few more games on the Potato Masher Pro. That's right, that's the official name, the Potato Masher Pro. There's more info in the description, so let's get to it. Skyrim is an interesting remaster to test because it's one of the most modded games on PC, so many fans of the game have already been enjoying greatly improved graphics for the last 5 years. The remaster is also free if you already own Skyrim and all its DLC on PC, so there are likely a lot of fans of the game who are trying this newer version and comparing it to their original modded games. I don't own one particular piece of the DLC, so thank you to EvilViking13 for loading me his Steam account for this video. I'm not going to compare the Special Edition to the mods I used in my Skyrim back catalog video, because plenty of other people have made excellent videos comparing vanilla Skyrim to modded versions and the Special Edition, and a lot of them know a lot more about all the different Skyrim mods that are available, so if you're interested you should go check those videos out. The Special Edition is not a generational leap in graphics quality, and that's really important to understand. The traditional Bethesda bugs and peculiarities are still there, and a lot of the assets are definitely a bit dated. But the whole presentation has a new coat of paint and it looks good enough that new players should enjoy it without feeling like they're playing an old Xbox 360 game. At 1080p, very high settings, and locked to 30 FPS, the Masher has no issues running the game. The highest GPU usage I saw was in the mid-70s, and most of the time it was around 50%. The PS4 also runs at native 1080p and is locked at 30 FPS, and it also is very stable. Given how easily the Masher maintains 30 FPS, I'm surprised the PS4 doesn't target 60 FPS. Open world games do tend to be somewhat CPU heavy, and that's a weakness for the PS4, but Skyrim seems pretty mild in the CPU department. It's hard to do exact comparisons of open world games with dynamic weather, so you may have to take my word on this, but at 1080p and 30 FPS, both platforms look very similar. In some scenarios like this mountain view, the Masher does appear to have more accurate ambient occlusion. In other views like this lake, I can't really see the same difference. Minute differences in cloud cover can account for some lighting changes, but I also didn't see any large differences in other interior shots where greater ambient occlusion is usually more apparent. An easier to spot difference is shadow quality. The Masher appears to have slightly higher shadow resolution maps, which in some scenes is pretty noticeable, in others I can't see any real difference, but the Masher either ties the PS4 or has a slight lead. Again, weather conditions do affect the comparisons a bit. In some shots, I saw slight differences in specular lighting and possibly tessellation, but these were so minor that I'm not sure there's an actual difference in the settings. The big takeaway should be that at the same frame rate and the same resolution, the two platforms are neck and neck. I'd say the experience is largely identical, and that includes one bad thing. I'm not necessarily opposed to running games at 30 FPS when they're extremely demanding, but Skyrim's motion blur is very distracting, and it makes both versions uncomfortable to play at 30 FPS. It blurs everything when you start moving, and once you see it, it's hard to ignore. Coupled with poor rotational blur, and this game actually hurts my eyes a bit at 30 FPS. Now, this is something that's very subjective, so I'm not saying you shouldn't play the game because of it, or you should avoid the PS4 version or anything like that. Do your own research and make your own decisions, but if, like me, you tend to be bothered by poor motion blur or 30 FPS in games, you may want to keep that in mind when you're trying to choose what to do. On PS4 you don't have many options, but on the PC you can always lower the settings and try for 60 FPS, so let's do that. I didn't actually have to lower the settings that far since the Masher has plenty of leftover power when it's running at 30 FPS. At 1080p, high settings, and 60 FPS, it doesn't have too many problems. Given the nature of open world games, there are still frame rate drops every once in a while, but the lowest I saw was about 54. In this game, that's not distracting or annoying, and most of the time it did stay right at 60. There's very little visual difference between very high and high. Object and ground detail at great distances is a little worse, and objects are slightly less detailed everywhere, but not to a distracting level, and you probably wouldn't be able to tell a difference unless you were comparing them side by side. At high, the Masher still looks about the same as the PS4 version, but it's running at double the frame rate most of the time. I did also drop to medium settings to see if that improves the small FPS drops. They still happen occasionally, but the game is a little smoother and it still looks decent. Now, I know some of you want to see 900p and 720p, so here you go. At medium settings, which is as low as I'd go before the visuals are very noticeably worse, the Masher can hit between 95 and 110 FPS at 900p. If you have a 60Hz monitor, you'll need to edit the game's INI file to turn off VSync, but if you have a 144Hz or similar monitor, you're fine. At 720p, the frame rate varies between 100 and 130, which is a slight improvement, but it's nothing crazy. However, I used temporal anti-aliasing because FXAA left too many jaggies for my preference. The downside of TAA is it can be a bit soft, and at sub-native resolutions it's very soft, and without a post-processing sharpening filter, I wouldn't play the game this way. I'm a bigger fan of clean, sharp images, which is why I tested some higher resolutions. Since the Masher crushes 1080p, it shouldn't be any surprise it can also run the game at 1440p, very high settings, and at 30 FPS. The GPU usage was very high, but it was stable in combat in a few different locations that I traveled to. Now, on a 1440p monitor, it makes sense to run the game at native res, but what if you have a 1080p monitor? I'm considering making a video on this if there's enough interest in the subject, because I really enjoy tech like this, but resolution supersampling is a cool way to increase visual quality at lower output resolutions. If you look at this same vista from earlier, at the same visual settings with the only difference being resolution, you can see more detail in fine objects like tree needles or characters. It's hard to tell through YouTube's compression, but the overall picture is a bit cleaner and there's less aliasing shimmer, and if you're playing in person, you can definitely see the difference. 1440p has over 75% more pixels than 1080p, it's actually pretty close to 78%, and it can make a nice visual difference. Now of course 60 FPS is great too, but to hit that at 1440p I had to lower the settings to low. While the game's art style is still pretty and it's very playable, there's a noticeable lack of grass and other foliage at any distance over 100 yards, and the world feels a bit less lush. Pop-in also becomes much worse and it does start to be distracting. Still, at 75% more resolution and double the frame rate of the PS4, a few compromises should be expected. Here's the PS4 running at 1080p, and to scale, here's the Masher at 1440p and 4K. That's right, at low settings and 30 FPS, the Masher can play Skyrim Special Edition at 4x HD resolution. Now, all the same problems I mentioned about low settings are still here. Pop-in is bad, foliage is sparse, and there are occasional frame rate drops. I don't know if I'd recommend playing the game at 4K on similar hardware, and while I haven't played it yet, the PS4 Pro almost definitely looks better at 4K in this particular game, but the Potato Masher is quite a bit slower and it's fairly impressive whenever it can deliver playable 4K, even if the experience isn't ideal. Playable 4K is also very subjective, with plenty of news outlets lamenting that the GTX 1080 is almost good enough for 4K gaming, guys, which is odd because I've been gaming at 4K for 2 years with cards as slow as an R9 290 or GTX 970, but anyway. Visually, the Potato Masher and the PS4 are a toss-up when it comes to Skyrim Special Edition. Neither look as good as a heavily modded version of the original, but this version is much easier to set up, and it's more stable than most modded setups. It's a no-brainer on either platform if you've been wanting to discover or re-experience Skyrim. Now there's one other issue that doesn't fit into any of my usual categories, but I do want to talk about it, and that's mods. PS4 mods and Bethesda games don't have a great history, and the PS4 has the least mod storage available of any platform. PC gaming is all about choices, and it's really cool that the PS4 and Xbox One players are starting to be able to make some of those choices too, but both offer very cut-down mod experiences compared to even a budget PC like the Potato Masher. Now, if you have no interest in modding, this might not matter to you at all, so I'm not discounting the PS4 version because of this. It's a nice option, but truthfully, I rarely mod my own games either. However, if mod support matters to you, and given Bethesda's rocky history with the PlayStation platform and mods, the PC version is a no-brainer. Setting that aside, the Masher delivers a comparable visual experience, but it can do it at double the frame rate. For a game with poor motion blur, that's a big difference, and in my mind, it makes the Masher the automatic winner. Factor in higher resolutions and super sampling to get more detail, and the Masher is even farther ahead. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like or share button. That makes a big difference in the number of new people who discover my videos, and I do appreciate it. I also co-host the Casual Shenanigans Gaming Podcast, and it would be awesome if you would check us out. Lastly, if you'd like a free trial of Gamefly, which is the game rental and streaming service that I use for quite a few of the Potato Masher videos, use this URL to receive your first month free. Links are in the description. Thanks for watching everyone, and have a great day.